someone running away from the hotel never to be seen again, a mother who disappears and leaves her entire family behind, and the most intense missing person story I have ever heard about. I'm your host Jade Arena, and this is Most Amazing Top 10. Coming in at number 10 we have Lars Matank, a very strange story from a man that was just a young dude trying to have some fun. Lars Matank went down to Bulgaria with 4 friends and all of them were having a great time. They were getting drunk and watching soccer, but here's the thing with soccer. It can be a very sensitive subject for some people. So there were some guys at this bar that didn't agree with Lars and his friends' opinion on soccer. This caused a massive brawl in the bar and everyone was pretty fine except for Lars. He had a ruptured eardrum from getting hit and this would roll into more problems. Him and his friends were supposed to fly the next day, but Lars couldn't because of his ear. So his friends had to take off without him. Lars was stuck trying to find another way home, but he started to become extremely paranoid. He thought that men were after him. The last words that anyone heard him say was his mother. He called her and told her that someone was after him. There was footage of him running out of his hotel, but no one knows what happened to the poor young man.
Heading on down to number 9 we have the 20th President of the United States, James Garfield. James had a similar outlook to a lot of people at the time and thought that the assassination of Abraham Lincoln was just a fluke and denied the opportunity to have security guards around him constantly. Unfortunately, on July 2nd, 1881, this decision led to him getting shot twice by a man who was trying to assassinate him. James lived for a few months after but was struggling pretty hard to survive because of the lack of medical technology available to remove the bullet that was still lodged in him. On the day of his death, James laid down to rest before he awoke clutching his chest. His friend, General David Swaim, was by his side and James reached out for him and asked, "Swaim, can't you stop this pain?" These were his final words and it's so sad to know that he passed in such pain, but I'm glad he had his friend near to him at the time.
And at number 8 we have Frank Sinatra. Frank Sinatra was an American singer and actor that won a number of awards like an Academy Award, 3 Golden Globes, multiple gold discs, and a Lifetime Achievement Grammy Award. But after being very ill for a number of months, he had a heart attack and died shortly after. His wife was by his side comforting him while this happened, and she revealed that his last words were, "I'm losing it." It's so sad and scary.
Coming in at number 7 we have Lost on a Hike. Whenever you're going on a hike you should always bring some friends and a way to contact people. This is a must for me because I have a terrible sense of direction. Well, Robert Goldmeiser would fall victim to his bad sense of direction. In 2016 he went for a hike in New Zealand with a friend, but right at the beginning of the hike his buddy backed out. Sometimes you look at the mountain and you see how high it is and you realize it's way too much to deal with. Well, Robert went on by himself and while he was doing this he was texting his partner. Partway through the hike he said he was scared and his partner was texting him back asking him if he was okay. All of a sudden Robert stopped responding. This is when things got scary. Robert's partner kept trying to contact him, but after a day of silence he called the police and a search was launched to try and find Robert. The party looked for Robert for an entire day and right when it looked like there was no hope he was found. What happened is when he was on the way back on his hike he got lost and ended up walking in circles through the woods. He had to spend 2 nights in the freezing cold before he was ever found. He would be taken to the hospital and survive this traumatic experience.
In our number 6 spot we have the 23rd President of the United States, Benjamin Harrison. Benjamin was actually the grandson of the 9th President, making them the only grandfather-grandson duo to have both held office. He was a Republican who took office in between the terms of Grover Cleveland and lost out on re-election. He definitely isn't ranked among the top or best presidents, but his commitment and his integrity are not questioned. Benjamin had an interesting personal life, considering after his wife passed, he remarried, but it just so happens that the woman he chose was the 37-year-old niece and former secretary of his late wife. In February of 1901, Benjamin was diagnosed with influenza, which at the time was called grip. He was treated the best way that they knew how at the time, but on March 13th, at the age of 67, he ended up passing away. What the doctors had thought was influenza was actually pneumonia, which was the cause of his death. His last words were, "Are the doctors here? Doctor, my lungs. It's super sad to know that he was in pain, and I'm not sure if they knew what pneumonia was in 1901, but if they did, it would be such a shame that he was misdiagnosed and mistreated. Pneumonia isn't fun even in 2020 when we have better ways of treating it.
We're now at our 5th and halfway mark with John Lennon, an amazingly talented singer and songwriter who was the founder and co-lead vocalist for the Beatles. On December 8th, 1980, John Lennon was assassinated outside of his Manhattan apartment. The man that took his life was a fan that traveled all the way from Hawaii. Apparently he didn't like Lennon's lifestyle and how he was portraying himself to the press. On that night, he waited outside of Lennon's apartment and then shot him 4 times in the back. Lennon's last words were, "I'm shot, I'm shot." He repeated it twice, and that was the last thing he ever said. Rest in peace, John Lennon.
Witnesses told police Lennon was shot near the door to his apartment building as he and Yoko Ono returned from a recording studio.
I saw John and Yoko get out of the limousine. They walked into the gate.
Coming in at number 4, we have Brandon Lawson. Back in 2013, Brandon Lawson would take off in his truck after getting into a fight with his girlfriend, and that is the only part of the story that sounds normal. Not long after driving away, he had to pull over because he was out of gas, and then he called his brother. He told his brother that he had been chased out of town and people were coming to kill him. This was very strange, and Brandon had a history of drug use, so he might have been having a trip. Well, Brandon then called the police and told him he was being chased through the woods, and then he called his girlfriend and told her he was in the woods bleeding, and then he was never seen again.
Coming in at our number 3 spot, we have the 35th President of the United States, John F. Kennedy. The Kennedy family is one of the most politically established families in American history. John is highly regarded as a great president and actually came 3rd in a list of highly admired people of the 20th century. John and his wife were slightly younger than their predecessors, which gave them this sort of pop culture influence as well as their obviously political influence. On Friday, November 22nd, 1963 at 12:30 p.m., John was assassinated as he was traveling in a presidential motorcade throughout downtown Dallas, Texas. He ended up being struck by 2 bullets and was immediately taken to hospital, where he was pronounced dead 30 minutes later. While I don't have time to go into who assassinated him or why, I will tell you that his last words were to a woman named Nellie Connolly, who was traveling in the same car as him. She had said to him, "You certainly can't say that the people of Dallas haven't given you a warm welcome, Mr. President," to which he replied, "No, you certainly can't." It's crazy because they very obviously had no idea about what was just moments away from happening, but I'm glad that it seems like he was feeling welcomed and well loved before this tragic incident took place.
In our 2nd spot, we have Amy Winehouse, another super talented individual. Like, her voice is incredible. It sends shivers down my spine. But on July 23rd, 2011, Amy passed away from alcohol poisoning. The night before her death, Amy Winehouse met with her doctor and told her that after 3 weeks of being sober, she started drinking again because she was bored. The conversation ended with Winehouse saying, "I don't want to die." And that was one of the last things that she ever said. The next day, the bodyguard found her laying in the same position as she was a couple hours prior. He checked on her, and that's when he knew she was gone. Now, this one breaks my heart because she literally was so worried about dying, and then the very next day, the very thing that she feared happened.
And last on the list, we have Ray Gricker. This man was the district attorney that was going after Jerry Sandusky, but at the time of his disappearance, no one knew this. Ray Gricker was the district attorney of Century County, Pennsylvania, and out of nowhere, one day he disappeared. The last thing anyone heard from him was his girlfriend getting a call from Gricker telling her that he was coming home from work soon. He never showed up, and his car was found with everything taken out of it. The last things that were found in his car was a laptop and phone. Both of these items had been soaked in water, so it was too hard to get any sort of information out of them. It wasn't until after this that it became public knowledge that Gricker had been working on a case to take down Penn State football coach Jerry Sandusky. People think that the university and Sandusky might have gotten word that Gricker was building a case against them and wanted to take him out before things went public. You'd be surprised how much money and power a school like Penn State has.
Starting off this list, in our number 10 spot, we have the 18th President of the United States, Ulysses S. U.S. Grant. I am certainly no American political expert, but by what I read about Ulysses Grant, he seemed to be a pretty alright guy. His death came on July 23, 1885, after he lost his battle with throat cancer. His last spoken word was water, which is pretty sad considering what he was going through. But he did lose the ability to speak sometime before his death, so a more accurate portrayal of his last words would be something he wrote shortly before he passed. He wrote, "There was never one more willing to go than I." That is so dark and sad to think that he was just kind of done with life. But after suffering a painful disease, I can understand why. He certainly lived quite the life as he made it all the way to being the president. He was only 63 at the time, but I feel like by 1885 standards, that might have been pretty old.
In our 9th spot, we have Steve Irwin, but before I go any further, please make sure to give this video a big thumbs up because it really helps us out. Steve Irwin, otherwise known as the Crocodile Hunter, was known for getting up close and personal with dangerous creatures like crocodiles or venomous snakes. It seemed like nothing scared him. Sadly, on September 4th of 2006, while filming a documentary called Ocean's Deadliest, Steve got pierced by a stingray's barb. The barb went right through his chest, piercing his heart. Crew helped him onto the boat as he started to bleed to death. One of the crew members, Justin, tried to comfort Steve and said, "Think of your kid, Steve. Hang on, hang on, hang on." Steve just looked up at him and said, "I'm dying." And that was the last thing he said.
Next on the list we have yes. Not a lot of information to go off of when someone just sends you the word yes and then disappears forever. This story goes back to 2017 and it's about Jaden Pinto Thompson. He was traveling across the United States with his friend. The two were a couple of young dudes that were out there trying to have a good time, but partway through the trip, Jaden's mother got worried. She hadn't talked to him for a while and she knew that he was not doing well emotionally. He was having a lot of problems with his father. So his mother tried to contact him, but she couldn't get a hold of him. For an entire day she called and texted and he never responded. She kept asking if he was okay and where he was, and he later responded with one word, which was yes. It's so annoying when you send someone a novel worth of text and then they give you a one-word answer. Well, Jaden was later reported missing. Apparently him and his friend Lucas, who he was traveling with, got into an argument and Lucas left him on the side of the road. After this, no one has ever seen him. Some people think that Jaden might have been going through some type of paranoia. This is because he was telling people that there was a warrant for his arrest, but there was no such thing.
In our number 7 spot, we have the 22nd and the 24th President of the United States, Grover Cleveland. Grover has not been regarded as a particularly great president, and it has been said that his greatest accomplishment might have been the introduction that he gave so that the more modern presidency that began with Theodore Roosevelt could emerge. In the fall of 1907, Grover fell very ill, and in 1908 he ended up suffering a heart attack. On June 24th, 1908, he ended up passing away with his last words being, "I have tried so hard to do right." I think this is pretty dark because it's sad to think that he was worried about the impact he had left on the world in his final moments. Death really does seem like the worst time to start having an existential crisis.
In our 6th spot, we have Paul Walker. Paul Walker was an actor known primarily for the series The Fast and the Furious. He passed away on November 30th, 2013 after attending a charity event. Paul's last words were, "We'll be back in 5 minutes." This was said to Jim Torp, a man working at the event. But sadly, Paul never returned back. He got into a car that his friend was driving, and a little while later they crashed into a concrete lamppost and 2 trees before it burst into flames, killing Walker and the driver instantly.
In our number 4 spot, we have the 34th President of the United States, Dwight D. Eisenhower. Dwight was a 5-star general in the Army during World War II before he became president. Dwight has been seen as an inactive president, but some things that he has been praised for are ending the Korean War and not starting any others in the meantime, and for stabilizing the Soviet-American rivalry. On March 28, 1969, Dwight ended up passing away at the Walter Reed Army Medical Center from congestive heart failure. He was 78 at the time, and his last words ended up being, "I want to go. God take me." I guess it's a good thing that he felt ready when it came time, but it is pretty scary to think that he had just kind of given up. Maybe his time in the war gave him some memories that he just didn't want to have anymore.
In our third spot we have Nostradamus. Nostradamus was a very famous man known for being a prophet. Apparently he could see into the future, and honestly a lot of his predictions have come true, so people believe that he was legit. Well, Nostradamus actually predicted the exact date of his death. On July 1st, 1566, he made sure to tell his priest all of his last predictions because he knew that the next day he was going to die. The priest ended the conversation saying, "Until tomorrow," and he replied with, "You will not find me alive at sunrise." He died that night. His last words to another person were, "Tomorrow I shall no longer be here." That's pretty freaky.
In our number 1 spot today we have the 37th President of the United States, Richard Nixon. Richard has quite the reputation for his second term due to the rise of Watergate, and was the only president who resigned from the position. There is a lot to unpack about Richard's second term, and we'll honestly have to save that for another video, but we will skip to what you're here for. On April 18th, 1994, Richard unfortunately suffered a stroke. He was awake and alert for a while but unable to speak. Because of the trauma his brain had suffered, he ended up slipping into a coma before he passed away on April 22nd. Before the stroke, his last words were to his housekeeper, and all he said was "help." It's really scary to know that he knew something bad was happening to him, but it really is even scarier to have been awake and unable to speak for the rest of the time after that. Luckily, when he did end up passing, he was 81 years old, and he had his daughters by his side so that they could tell him that they loved him and say their goodbyes.
Starting off this countdown, we have Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs is famous for co-founding Apple, of course. But sadly, in 2003, he was diagnosed with an unusual form of pancreatic cancer. On October 5th, 2011, almost exactly 8 years since he was first diagnosed, he lost his battle to cancer. According to his family, Steve's final words were, "Oh wow, oh wow, oh wow." He said it 3 times. Then he lost consciousness and died several hours later. They also said that he first looked at his sister Patty, then over to his children, and then to his partner, and then over their shoulders past them. And that's when he said, "Oh wow." So what was it that he saw over their shoulders? Was it the white light everyone talks about?
Coming at number 9, we have missing in Costa Rica. Back in 2018, a girl named Carla would be in Costa Rica. She sent a message to her family saying things were pretty sketchy here, and those would be the last words that anyone ever heard from her. Carla was down in Costa Rica with her sister-in-law, and things seemed to be going great. The two of them were having tons of fun, but they didn't get flights returning at the same time. Carla's sister-in-law came back early, and Carla was left at her Airbnb alone. That was when she sent this message. The power kept cutting in and out at her Airbnb, and she thought something could go wrong soon. The weird thing is, this isn't the last time someone saw Carla. She reportedly went to the airport and even checked in, but never got on her flight. Someone said they saw her get into a strange car at the airport, and police think that she might have been abducted.
In our number 8 spot today, we have the 21st President of the United States, Chester Alan Arthur. Before I dive into this one, guys, please don't forget to hit that thumbs up because it really helps us out. Chester was actually the 20th Vice President, but became the 21st President after the death of James Garfield. After his presidency was finished, Chester went back to work at his New York law firm. He had some health issues already, so he wasn't working a ton, but on November 16th, 1885, he ordered for all of his personal and official papers to be burned, which seems like kind of weird behavior. The following day, he suffered a cerebral hemorrhage and never regained consciousness until he passed the next day. While Chester's last words weren't officially recorded, a friend of his said that his last words to him were that life is not worth living. This is a pretty dark message to leave someone, but maybe Chester didn't know that this was the last time that he would speak to this friend.
Moving on to number 7, we have Frida Kahlo. Famous artist Frida Kahlo was said to be one of Mexico's greatest artists. She began painting mainly self-portraits after a bus accident that left her severely injured. From there, her artwork became well known, and they were exhibited in Paris and Mexico before her death. About a week after her 47th birthday on July 13th, 1954, she passed away. Her last words were in her diary entry, and it read, I hope exit is joyful, and I hope never to come back. Now, it's said that she passed away from a pulmonary embolism, but others believe that she took her own life. At that point in her life, she did have a couple of failed attempts. This was because she had to have her right leg amputated below her knee from a gangrene infection, and that really affected her. It's really sad that her final words are basically saying how she wanted to die and then never come back.
Number 6 on the list, we have Frederick Valentich. Now for something a little bit more spooky. It's time for an alien abduction story. This has to be one of the most famous abduction stories of all time. Freddie Val was working for the Australian military. He was one of the best pilots. He was known for hitting sick barrel rolls and showing off to all the ladies. I may have made that part up, but this next part is the truth. In 1978, Freddie was in charge of a test flight that should have gone off without a hitch, but partway through the flight, he reported something that was following him. He said that there was something that looked like a flying saucer floating next to his ship. He tried to avoid the strange spacecraft, but no matter where he turned, the thing would keep pace with him and tracked him down. He reported back to base via radio that he had no idea what this thing was, and he eventually said it's hovering and it's not an aircraft. At this point, I assumed that the dude was pooping his little pants, but we will never know because right after he said this, the radio went dead and Freddie Boy disappeared. He was never heard from again, and the people who are really into alien conspiracy theories will tell you that the Australian government has more info on what happened that day, but they refuse to share it with the public.
In our 5th spot and halfway mark, we have the 32nd President of the United States, Franklin D. Roosevelt. Franklin still holds the record for the longest time in office, as he was elected 4 consecutive times. Of course, this was before the 2-term limit that now exists. Franklin is regarded as one of the best presidents there's ever been, but of course there have been plenty of people who criticized his policies and positions, but also because of the fact that he was the president for most of World War II, his response to that was also highly scrutinized. Franklin was able to serve 3 terms entirely and was 2 months and 23 days into his 4th term when he passed. On April 12th of 1945, Franklin was sitting for a portrait when he said, "I have a terrific headache." He then slumped over in his chair, and upon examination by his attending cardiologist, he ended up passing away from an intracerebral hemorrhage. It's crazy to think that he had no idea what he was just seconds away from, and that he really did just think he had a headache. I guess maybe that's a good way to go though. I feel really bad for the guy that was doing the portrait because I feel like that would be very awkward.
Moving on to number 4, we have Mozart. Mozart was a very well-known and talented composer. He got into music very early on in life and was extremely gifted. But on December 5th, 1791, he passed away at the age of 35. And of course, there's a bunch of theories as to how he died. Some say he was poisoned by his rival, but it's believed that he died from a disease that led to a severe fever, causing him to slip into a coma. But we still don't know what disease led to his death. Anyways, one of the last things he ever said was, "The taste of death is upon my lips. I feel something that is not of this earth." I mean, that's very artistic, but also it's sad because he knew that he was going to pass away soon.
Coming in at number 3, we have Henry Hudson. Henry Hudson is the man responsible for colonizing the Hudson Bay. He was obsessed with finding the Northwest Passage. If he had found the Northwest Passage, this would have opened trade between Europe and Asia, and he would have been the famed explorer who made it happen. Well, to do this kind of thing, you have to bring a bunch of men with you, and all of them have their own opinions. And to find the Northwest Passage, you have to move through one of the coldest areas on the planet. And they were also trying to do this in 1610, so when it got cold back then you didn't have heated seats to keep you warm. Well, Henry tried to get his men to push on from Hudson's Bay and find the Northwest Passage, but it turns out that the dudes on board didn't like this plan. They mutinied and took him and the 8 men who wanted to stay with him and put them in a boat in the middle of the Hudson's Bay. They then left them in that boat in the middle of the bay and took off. Apparently Hudson wished them all death before he was never seen again. Obviously this dude is dead now, but no one knows what happened to him after he was left out in the bay.
Moving on to our number 2 spot, we have the 36th President of the United States, Lyndon B. Johnson. Lyndon was the vice president to John F. Kennedy, but took over the presidency after the assassination we just talked about. When Lyndon first held office, he was looked down upon and had some pretty low ratings. Since then, however, he has began to become regarded as an above average president, and some of the policies he put in place still exist and remain intact today. Lyndon shocked America when he decided decided not to run for a second term, but it was because he was worried about his health and being unable to make it all the way through. Lyndon had a bunch of heart problems and suffered 2 heart attacks. Surgery was considered for him, but doctors weren't sure he was healthy enough to be able to survive it. On January 22nd, 1973, Lyndon called for help on his telephone as he was suffering another massive heart attack. His last words were, "Send Mike immediately." Mike was his Secret Service agent who was housed not too far from where Lyndon was, but by the time Mike got there, it was already too late. I hate the idea that he died alone, but he lived a good life and accomplished a lot before his passing. And even if Mike was there, the outcome most likely wouldn't have been any different.
And in our number 1 spot, we have Heath Ledger. Heath Ledger was a well-known Australian actor known for starring in movies such as 10 Things I Hate About You, Brokeback Mountain, and The Dark Knight. Sadly, on January 22nd, 2008, he passed away from an accidental prescription drug overdose. The night he died, he was on the phone with his sister who was worried about him. He told her that he was going to take sleeping pills on top of his prescription for a chest cold because he couldn't sleep, but she warned him not to. His last words were, Katie, look, it'll be fine, you know. I just need to get some sleep." Sadly, he never woke up.